This is Melissa Gonzalez. Today is Tuesday, April 30th, 2013. I'm interviewing General Willard Latham for the first time. This interview is taking place at the University of Texas at Arlington Central Library, located in Arlington, Texas. This interview is sponsored by the College of Liberal Arts and is part of the Maverick Veterans Voices Project. So, General Latham, where are you from originally?
Well, I was born in Arkansas, but my father was from Texas, and he was working for the Lion Oil Company in El Dorado, Arkansas, and my mother was a school teacher there. They met, they married, and my life started there. And I'm like most people say, I was born somewhere else, but I came to Texas as soon as I could. And when I was 11 years old, we moved back to Texas to the farm that my father had over there.
Did you participate in ROTC in high school? They didn't offer it?
No, they didn't. It was a very small high school.
Okay.
26 people in my graduating class, 8 boys.
Did you have any family members who were in the military?
My father was in the Navy in World War I. And then, of course, my cousins, older than I am, went into the service.
So why did you choose to attend North Texas Agricultural College?
Well, when I graduated from high school, it was in the spring of 1945, and of course I believed, as most of my generation seemed to, that if you didn't serve as you became of age, you were very delinquent in your conduct. And I wanted to join the Marines. My mother would not sign the papers, so then I had to wait. A friend of mine, a man in my same high school class, a boy, he had a cousin, a brother-in-law who came to NTAC, but he didn't say it that way. He said, I have this cousin who went to a school out in Arlington, and you can wear uniforms out there. As a matter of fact, you have to wear uniforms out there. And we thought, well, we're saved. So we hitchhiked out here, and I borrowed the money to go to school, borrowed $100 anyway. Of course, the tuition for a semester in those days was $25. And but we knew that after we got to Dallas, we took a bus, Texas Motor Coach, I believe they called it, out to Arlington, and we got off down on Cooper Street and Division. Cooper Street and Division, and no, it wasn't Cooper Street, it was Main Street. Anyway, one of those streets. And Center Street, that's what it was. And we hiked up here to the College Street, and there was an iron archway over the road, North Texas Agricultural College, and that's where we knew where we were.
What was your major?
I majored in pre-law. They had a course for that. And my friend who came with me, he wanted to study agriculture. So we all, and a lady who died last year, Kay Van Dam, her name was Nation. Her father was the postmaster for the college. So she was the only live person we found that day we got here. And she was secretary to the agriculture department. And we said, we need to get a job. She said, well, okay, you just go on out to the college farm and you'll find Mr. Owens. He was a professor, head of the ag department, and his house was out there, where the police station is now. And so went out there, so my friend, Weldon Ham, he got the chickens and I got the dairy farm. And they had dormitory type quarters out there. They were just long single-story building, but so we moved in and went to work.
So when did you join the Corps of Cadets here?
When you signed up for school here, unless you had a dripping blood something, you had to. I mean, that was it. That was part of the program.
Okay.
You were in. There wasn't any question about do you want to. If you came to school here, unless you were a veteran already, you were physically disabled, you had to join.
When did you become commander of the Sam Houston Rifles?
In 1948.
And what were your duties?
Well, I was finished. What had happened, maybe I alluded to it earlier, when I got my draft notice in September, I tried to get in Army OCS, Officer Candidate School, and they said, well, the war's over now, so we don't need any more officers like that. So I joined, the Navy had a special program called Combat Air Crewman, so I joined that and signed up for that. And when I finished the semester in December, or getting close to it in December, in those days they had 3 semesters in the year, just spring, summer, fall, and they were all the same. It was a full-blown course. And so I had finished, as I was, the Navy said, okay, come on, you're going now. I went to see the then registrar, who was Dr. Herford, who later became president, but he was still, he was still the registrar when I went, and he was still the registrar when I came back. But he said, if you're passing all your courses, you will get credit. You won't have to take the final exam, just go ahead. So I went into the Navy for 2 years and trained as a combat air crewman and went overseas. And then I became a air traffic controller and had a great time. My state duty station was in Port Leode, French Morocco, and right out there, up east of Casablanca.
And I imagine that was your first time overseas?
Oh, yeah. But I had great, the job the Air Force and the Navy had, the Navy's job was air sea rescue, and the Air Forces had a squadron of B-17s there, and they flew all over Europe photographing, mapping, and that sort of thing. So we would catch an airplane when we weren't doing otherwise, and I had a chance to go to England for a great time, Paris for a great time, and Germany for a great time.
So in addition to ROTC here at NTAC, did you participate in any other traditions on campus?
Traditions?
Were there any traditions already in place, kind of campus traditions?
We lived if you lived on this campus, you were subject to the class system they had, of course, so yes, the freshmen shined the sophomores' shoes and made their beds for them and cleaned their room for them. And that's some interesting things. Sometimes they would say, "Go get me a date." And you have to remember, we had I think about 1,800 cadets and about 300 girls. And so sometimes you had to really work at that.
Were there any professors or instructors here that influenced you?
Yes, a professor named Norton McGiffin who taught history, but he was actually, he was a lawyer. And by coincidence, his home was over on Davis Drive, right where Netterman, I think it is now, runs into Davis and that sort of thing. And by coincidence, the man who lived next door to him became my father-in-law in later years. But anyway, Mr. McGiffin was a very pro-patriot, and he was also a radio commentator for one of the Fort Worth stations in those days. After I came back, one thing they had a math clinic here, and my strong suit in high school, and never became my strong suit, was mathematics. So I used to say some people majored in all these esoteric things. I majored in the math clinic up there. But they had professors who would be there and help, really kind of work you through it. Man, I really worked at it up there.
Did you work while you attended NTAC?
Yes, that was part of our contract there. Our room and board was given to us for the jobs. My friend's job was a chicken farm, and mine at the dairy. And I had to milk with 11 cows. And I had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, get over there and get started. Mr. Rice was the farm manager, and one other fellow would come sometime and help do that. Help milk the cows. But we milked the cows, and we took the milk into the dairy part where they had a cream separator and poured all the milk in there, and it separated out. It was kind of mechanized, and then they'd have cream in one bottle and milk in the other, and that was all for the distribution to the faculty. And I imagine I presume they had to pay for it somewhere, but I don't know what. Maybe they did. And then I had, after milking the cows, I had to feed the calves, which when a calf was born to these brood cows, they didn't allow them to nurse. They immediately were separated and put in a separate pen, and then I had to go, that was my job, oh totally. You had to take milk that you had just milked and pour it in a bucket, and each calf had a bucket. And the calf, so you'd catch the little calf, a younger calf, and bring it, who had just been born, stick your finger in the milk, stick it in the calf's mouth, let him, while he was sucking on your finger, you were bringing him down to the water. The bucket had the milk in it. As soon as he was taught how to drink, then all you do is just pour the milk in. And then we had to come back, put on our uniform, walk a mile to school, and get started by 8 o'clock.
So after graduation, did you go for additional training?
Graduation what?
From NTAC.
Oh, no, I had just finished the first year, and as I mentioned how Dr. Herford said, well, you have taken it. I came back and started to sign up again, and they said, well, you only finished one semester. I said, whoa, tilt. And so I went back to see Dr. Herford. He says, I remember that conversation, and you will get go to the teachers if you were passing at that time. And they all had their grade books, and so I got my credits, and I was able to sign up, and that would be the spring. I actually came back, the Navy discharged what they call convenience of the government. I think it was discharged in November of 1947, and so I came back out here in December to do this. So I got squared away, and they were still giving the 3 semesters at that time, teaching that way. So I enrolled in ROTC. The professor of military science at that time, Colonel Edgar Keltner. Of all the instructors I had here, Colonel Keltner was the most prominent and the most effective, and he's still my idol as a gentleman and an officer and a man. And he was captured on Bataan, and he'd spent the war as a prisoner of the Japanese. And so he did not encourage veterans to join the ROTC, because many veterans said, look, man, I did this once, I ain't about to do it again. And but I finally convinced him. He said, I was a cadet officer when I left. I'd become a cadet second lieutenant in my last semester. And he said, well, you know, I'm not going to make you an officer. You're going to have to start over. Fine. So that started, and I guess by, I'm going to say March of '48, then he commissioned me again.
So when did you graduate after returning?
In December of 1948.
Okay.
So I'd finished the second year.
Okay.
I had a pile over there. I believe the Army came up with a new program that if you had been 2 years enlisted service honorably and passed a board of officers and had 2 years of college, they would give you a commission in the reserve with a entry on what they call a competitive tour for regular Army. And so I signed up for all that and went in under that. So my friend, he was actually my roommate, Ray Garza. In addition to mathematics, I was no whiz at languages either, but Spanish was the one I had to take. Ray was from Rio Grande City, Texas, and so when I needed coaching in Spanish, he was my savior. But I think we were the first officers commissioned on the campus into the second lieutenants in the Army. So we were commissioned in January of 1949.
And what happened after that?
Well, we went to Fort Benning, Georgia, to the Special Associate Basic Course, Basic Infantry Course. And then I went to parachute school, and Ray got out of the Army and came back here and went back to SMU, got his degree, and became a principal in one of the schools in Dallas. And I went to Japan to be signed to the 1st Cavalry Division in Tokyo in the Army of Occupation.
Okay.
That was in 1940, and got there in July or August of 1949. And I got married, incidentally, in June.
Do you feel your training here at NTAC prepared you for that?
I felt totally prepared. I probably wasn't, but I thought I was. And then and when you're young, you have pretty optimistic. But I'd gone through the basic course. I had done well there. I had done well here, and I was a cadet corps commander when I left. And so I thought I'm ready. Let's go. That's the way I felt anyway.
Did they provide any cultural training for you?
Where?
Here in the States before you were deployed.
Cultural training, I'm not sure.
I guess wherever, like for example, you were in Japan, did they kind of give you an idea of what to expect when you landed in Japan?
Well, the Army, I didn't get anything like that here.
In the Army.
In the Army, they gave you a little pamphlet how to behave with the Japanese, and that was sort of thing. Some things you shouldn't do, but that was a different thing than I believe anyone in the current Army, current few years. We were the occupation army, and the Japanese did what we said, and that could be a pro and a con. I think you can imagine. But I felt very strongly, and I later served in Germany while we were still occupying. And although it was different, but in Japan, General MacArthur very correctly, in my view, analyzed and considered, and he'd had some experience also with that, but how to treat the Japanese. So he always was a great, they think he replaced the emperor. And he had a very good way of carrying that off. Now, soldiers in their irreverence, his name was, of course, MacArthur. They referred to him as Magara.
So you said that you had also served in Germany with occupation forces. What was the difference between Japan and Germany serving in that respect?
The smell, for one thing. The Japanese fertilized their fields with human waste, and they had these carts pulled by oxen or little donkeys sometimes, which they would go around during every day and gather this stuff up and then carry it out and put it on their fields. And so that's when you came into Japan. I went overseas on a troop ship. When you pulled into Yokohama Harbor and the wind was blowing just right, you had a very aromatic introduction to Japan, and that was quite common all over. And and the Japanese were different than the Germans. They were very much nodding their heads, and all you had to tell one is jump, and he'd start up to see where you wanted to go. I'm sure they didn't like that, but we didn't know any better. And but the policy of the Army, they did not put up. Our Army did not condone that. I mean, you had to behave, and they did by and large. You had people who had to be taught to behave, but it was fine. We had things there that I said I married a girl I met here, and she lived in Arlington, as a matter of fact. And first we had a maid in this apartment we had. Well, it was not, and we lived in an area where you had communal eating. That is like a big, almost like a hospital type, a big dining room, club, I guess you'd say. And our initial place where we lived was a former Japanese prince's home, which turned into an officers' club and billets and so forth. So we had one room about half as big as this one, with rice paper walls. So you stick your finger through it and look see what's going on back there. And but we had a maid, and of course the maid had nothing to do. So and then we moved to another place where we had a more spacious, and we still had a maid. But I think all they did was maybe she would make the bed in the morning and maybe sweep the floor. But the Japanese were great flower arrangers. So I think my wife would put flowers in one place, and if she wasn't looking, the maid would move it somewhere else.
So how often were you able to communicate with your family?
Well, you wrote letters. My wife, she was with me, but we began in she arrived in Japan in January of 1950. And that's right. And so that's when we started our marriage. We had married in June, and then 2 weeks later I went to Japan, and then she came. But we started, the Army decided that we should do some training. Now before that, we were occupation soldiers, and what we would do, unless we were, in our case, my headquarters, my battalion was in downtown Tokyo, and it was we occupied what used to be the former Japanese Marine barracks. And the only reason that everybody said that you knew it was a Japanese Marine barracks because they were bigger than the other Japanese, and the urinals built up were higher. But so we had guard responsibilities, like guard the Bank of Japan, which was downtown, and several other places, and around the Emperor's Palace, which was right near there. But there's a moat all the way around it, and we did not guard in that area where it was obvious that that's what we were doing. And the Japanese, of course, they still revered the emperor, and so they had a moat around, and occasionally you'd see a Japanese fishing there. And I remember going up to one time and said, fishing, and I'm not sure. Well, he understood enough English to at least answer me, and I said, well, did you ever catch anything? Because I never saw anyone catch anything. And he said, no. I said, well, why are you fishing? Because I like to fish.
Was your wife able to travel with you through other deployments?
Oh, yes. But this one only lasted for about 6 months. In fact, on our first wedding anniversary, which was 25th of June, 1950, the Korean War started. And at that time, at least North Korea attacked South Korea. And I'm embarrassed to say, I wasn't sure where Korea was. The only thing I really knew about it was for sure that when I was in the basic course at Fort Benning, they announced that the lower 10% of the class was going to go to Korea. Well, it made you figure out, well, hey, I don't want to go there. But anyway, they attacked, and of course immediately that one did not go well. One thing that's I think significant about the whole time, at that time in the Army, although I was in the middle of this condition, the Army and the whole military had a drastic reduction from World War II. For instance, in an infantry regiment, I was in the 1st Cavalry Division, but it had been dismounted in World War II, and they fought as infantry during the whole war. So it was, although they had a lot of old cavalrymen who came out there, the senior officer who was cavalry, walked around with riding crops and all that sort of thing. But you should have 3 battalions. You only had 2. So if you had, and each battalion should have had an artillery battery. So instead of an artillery battalion, then we had 3 batteries, and they only had 2. So that's the way we were. And of course we were. People joined the Army. You had draftee Army, but it was easy to get out of it. So that we had an army of people who were probably, you had a mixture of it. Some could read real well, and some couldn't read at all, and that sort of thing. And so anyway, we had a number of very difficult starts in that. At first, it was a police action. That's what they called it. Of course, the South Korean Army just collapsed. So the North Koreans were coming. They decided President Truman decided to intervene. So he said, well, we'll send the 24th Division. And of course, 24th Division was in the same shape we were in. So they took the senior and non-commissioned officers out of our outfit, gave them to the 24th Division, which was down in lower Honshu, and they piecemealed them into the area over there, and then they were beaten up badly, and so then they decided they better send us and send the Cavalry Division and the 7th Infantry Division, which was at Hokkaido, but in the same shape we were in. So what point I guess I'm making here was I had sergeants leading squads when they started this thing, they took them and put them in the 24th Division. So then I had corporals, and I had PFCs leading the squads, and a corporal was my platoon sergeant, and he didn't have any more experience than I did. Not much more anyway. And so that's the way we were geared up, and then we went. So we mounted up a seaborne movement to Korea, and I now know historically the plan was to go into Incheon. Well, by the time they got us to sea, they didn't have the shipping. So during sometime after the war, our country had given the Japanese merchant marine these LSTs, landing ship tanks, which were big flat bottom things that you could carry a tank in, or several tanks, and it would lower the whole front end of it and let the tank run off onto the beach. That sort of. But they turned it over to the Japanese merchant marine for fishing. So they gathered all those back in. So the crews were Japanese fishermen. So when we went aboard, there was a strong smell of fish because the Japanese ate raw fish. And so we loaded up and we went toward Incheon, but then suddenly the North Koreans were already past there, moving towards Busan. So we changed and went around the other end and came in about halfway up the peninsula and landed at Pohang Dong. You can imagine what GIs do with that. And we went in there and started moving inland, and we finally went into position where we could hopefully stop them, or thought that's what we were going to do. Well, the tactics you would normally use would put your units together so they could interlock and support each other. We went in 12 miles apart, and that's the way it was. So you immediately were surrounded, and then we started fighting our way out of encirclements. That kept up for several days until we finally got back to what was called the Naktong River, and we established what was called the Busan perimeter, and that's where and we got an order in writing from General Walker, who was Army commander. There will be no further withdrawal. We will stand or die in these positions. That's a pretty interesting bit of information. But we were with the help of the Air Force, and so we were able to hold until MacArthur then got a division, a Marine division, and the 7th Infantry Division, which was up in Hokkaido, and they landed at Incheon. And of course, so we broke out of the peninsula and went north to Pyongyang, and then we ran into the Chinese at Unsan.
So how long were you in Korea for total?
1 year.
1 year.
I was in the first group to rotate home, but we had very, very few of us left who were there to start with.
Mm-hmm. When you say rotate home, what does that mean?
Well, they came up, they had to make a decision. During World War II, they did not rotate units and personnel. They just kept feeding people into units. This time, they decided to, after you've been there a year, they would rotate you home and back to the States. And then they called up the reserves, and they were sending people in. All that was, I guess, organizationally probably worked out fine. It was a mess to cohesion of units and that sort of thing. We had people, honestly, that came into our units. I had to teach them how to load their rifle while we were moving up.
Was it strange going back home after being overseas for so long?
Well, I was glad. How about that? But I was in the first group. We had one of these welcome home things in Seattle, and that was good. We didn't have to march. They put us all in vehicles and drove us all through downtown. Everybody whoop-de-doo.
So what other assignments did you have after that?
Well, I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, and I had almost everyone who had gone to Korea initially. We did not have any of the anti-malaria medication to take while we were there. So when we all came home, we immediately began to have malaria. And I got back, and while I was on leave, I began to have the attacks. And that's when they had a polio attack here in 1951. And I was sure I must be taking malaria, taking polio. And I got to Fort Bragg, and I had these attacks, and I think my commander, I was in the 505th Airborne Regiment, And I think I'd have these attacks where I'd run this very high fever, and I'd go to the dispensary and they'd fool around for, and then suddenly they wouldn't have any fever, and then so go back to work. Anyway, this kept going for about 2 weeks, and finally the doctor sent me to the hospital, and the doctors took my blood, and then they found the bugs they were looking for, and they gave me an anti-medicine, and so I finally recovered. But an interesting sideline to me was they had decided that, okay, I had survived a year of combat, so I must have passed the test to be a regular Army officer. My commission came through. I had to take a final physical for that, and because I'd had this malaria, they turned me down. And the doctors then came back and said, well, it will burn itself out in about 3 or 4 years. And so they said, well, okay, we'll keep you. And it's what it did. But I would have malaria about, first of all, it was every month, and then every 3 months, and then every 6 months, and then once a year. And finally. And then because they assigned me to limited duty. The Army had a policy then if you'd been in combat you couldn't, since I'd gone to limited duty status for at least 6 months, they had policy all combat returnees had to go to a division to impart all that hot information we allegedly had. So they assigned me to the 31st Infantry Division of the Mississippi Alabama National Guard, which had been federalized at Fort Jackson. So I had to go there for 6 months, and then I went back to the 82nd.
What did that entail, having to relay all that information? Was it just reports?
Well, no, I just became a company commander.
Oh, okay.
Company commander, and I was in effect saying, instead of doing it that way, do it this way.
Ah.
It was funny. I was the only regular officer then in the division, except one assistant division commander, a brigadier general. And I don't know if you know about the cohesion of a National Guard division. They're all from, this company that I was in was Natchez Rifles from Natchez, Mississippi, and they all were from Natchez. And so, they were very close knit. And here, I was about as, someone said I was about as popular as a ham sandwich at a Jewish picnic. And it was an interesting thing. Because I thought I knew the answers, so I was making them do it.
And where did you go after that?
I went back to Fort Bragg.
Okay.
And I was assigned to the 82nd and then the 18th Airborne Corps headquarters in an intelligence business. And I spent 2 years there, and then I was assigned to Germany.
And what was your assignment in Germany?
I was assigned to headquarters 7th Army, and I became an air liaison officer with the 7th Air Force, 12th Air Force. And then I became a company commander in the 2nd Armored Division.
And what were your duties while you were there?
Well, company commander, occupation army.
Okay.
And I was stationed at Mainz, Germany, right on the Rhine. And Germany was very pleasant in many, many ways compared to living in Japan. But it was still very, we worked hard. All of Germany, the Iron Curtain had descended across Germany, and NATO came into being. So there was that was a part of the Cold War activity. We were always in a state of high readiness. We were always combat loaded, and once a month we would be unannounced. We would get a call, usually at night, in the middle of the night, to deploy to what we call a GAO, General Alert Order Position, where that's where the war would start for us. And that's our job initially, the 2nd Armored Division. We were on the west side of the Rhine, and our job in Mainz was to guard the bridges over the river so that they would be open so that the French and whoever else was west of the bridge could get across more into the battle. And my job as a tank company commander was to guard the highway bridge. Well, it was a highway bridge and a railroad bridge. The railroad bridge, they can put boards on it and drive trucks across, whatever. I think the interesting part of that, the realities of what people are telling you to do, easy. We drive across the bridge and set ourselves up. And then we got an intelligence briefing that said, if the war started, they figured there would be 2 million people to come to be at those bridges areas trying to get across, and we weren't supposed to let them across. These are civilians. And I remember saying, well, Colonel, how would I do that? Just figure it out, Captain.
After your assignment in Germany, where did you go from there?
Came back to Fort Benning to go to the Officers Advanced Course.
Okay.
And it was a year course. And these various courses teach you to do, hopefully, what your next assignment would be. And generally speaking, for instance, when I went to the basic course, to be a company commander, a platoon leader, company commander. When you go to the advanced course, to be a battalion or regimental commander. And so I learned how to be one. But from there I came here to Arlington, North Texas Agricultural College for a 3-year assignment as assistant professor of military science.
And what was it like being on campus again after having been in the military for so long?
Well, it was very pleasant. I mean, I had not completed my degree, and so the Army paid it, so I would teach here in the daytime, go to school at TCU at night. And I was sponsor of the Sam Houston Rifles.
Yes.
So I was pretty busy. By then we had the 4th child, so we were busy.
It was at that time that you formulated the march.
Yes.
For the Sam Houston Rifles.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
Well, Arlington. While we were here, NTAC went to be Arlington State College, and they started working toward the 4-year degree situation. So the cadets that we had for 2 years were then moved right into their junior year, and they then started the summer camp. So we were going to summer camp before. Now, the instructors, we had to go to summer camp anyway in the previous 2 years, but we were going to enter in, our cadets then were going to go into summer camp as the first time. And Major Oliver Horde, who was here, then there were only 3 officers, Colonel Brock, Major Horde, and me. And I used to say laughingly, guess who did all the work? But anyway, it was a very close group. And we said, hey, we need to do something to tell everybody, let everybody know that we're not the new kids on the block. And I had developed a philosophy starting in Korea. When I got to Korea, the occupation army was a very relaxed situation. A lot of the senior officers who commanded were cavalry officers, and they'd served in the army before World War II, when the army wasn't a very busy thing, and so they were used to playing polo and horsing around and so forth. And part of our occupation activities, when we were there, we'd train in the morning, and then head to the officers' club, and by the 5 o'clock, then you had it was really cocktail hour, if you were inclined that way. I was not, and I was in very good physical shape. I was young, and that was before we went to Korea then. But I instituted a training program with my platoon, physical fitness and that sort of thing. But nobody else did. And so when we got to Korea, we had these situations I was telling you about, fighting our way out. It was in the summertime. It was boiling hot. And when we had to fight our way out and so forth, we would be going up and down these hills. And the major difference, I would be watching binoculars, and these North Korean soldiers would be running up the hills carrying their packs, and our people could hardly get up the hill without a pack. And we had to leave, sometimes wounded. We could not take them with us. I mean, we were falling back, fighting while we were going. And I just swore that no troops of mine would ever have that problem. And I think I stuck to that for 35 years. But that's what we were doing here. Look, we can do this. I had trouble convincing Colonel Brock. He thought we'd have some kind of an incident or somebody would die or something. And even the guy at 4th Army headquarters, he wasn't all that hot about it. But anyway, we started the training program, and we were starting then to teach tactics, because we were going into the 3rd year. We at least got permission from Mrs. Baird's farm, which, you know where Mrs. Baird's farm road is. Well, now you can't tell it, but it was out of just a regular country road out there then, and a lot of hills and that sort of thing. So we used to march out there to start with, and march back and do our tactical training out there, and then we were running out there and running back and doing our tactical training out there. So we were getting much more shape. And then when we got permission to actually make the march, the idea we had to go to Fort Hood, and so we figured out a 150-mile march. Although some of the papers said 60. We quite corrected them. But anyway, we started then. We would have on the weekends. We'd start going on longer marches. So we finally had it figured out where we'd go march 10 miles out toward Lake Arlington, 10 miles back, and we, in order to do this march, we had to make at least 25 miles a day. And that's what that was about. Big deal.
So how long were you here
3
with
years.
the cadets? 3 years?
And the first class to graduate were those that, I left at the end of the 3rd year and went to the staff college at Leavenworth, but I did come back for their graduation the next year. And I was already on orders. I was assigned to the Iceland Defense Force in Iceland, and I went there.
What was that like, Iceland?
Well, Iceland, Iceland is a very desolate place, but it's highly civilized. And now I guess the population in those days was about 180,000 people, but they're all Scandinavian. They were either Danish or from the Norway, Swedish area, Norway mostly. And they're highly literate. Had some interesting, and I was the only Army officer on the island. I was a war plans officer since I'd just been educated, so. And I was also the officer the commander was an admiral. The commander had contact with the Icelandic government.
Mm-hmm.
So I would coordinate or carry messages for the admiral and that sort of thing. So we had some very interesting experiences with that. The Icelandics they had national prohibition, but being a fishing nation, they were great smugglers. So they had a lot of drunks. But whenever we invited Icelandics out to in my case, I would invite them out to the officers' club and for officers' mess to entertain them and do whatever business we were doing. We'd go into the cocktail area or the bar. It was interesting. We'd have somebody come around and sit drinks. They never turned them down, even if they had one in front of them, take another, until they finally fell out of their chair. It was an interesting experience.
So when were you deployed to Vietnam?
Well, from Iceland I came back and then went to the Armed Forces Staff College.
Okay.
Iceland was what we call a hardship tour. My wife could not come, and so I came back and went to the Armed Forces Staff College, and then I was assigned to the Pentagon, and I spent 1 year in the Infantry Career Management Division, and then I went to the Office of the Chief of Staff and worked in the Policy and Strategy Division. And then at that time I was ordered to go to Berlin as a battalion commander. And so when we got to the airport in New York, we got out of our house or apartment, stored everything, whatever. We were in the airport there with 5 kids and 5 children, and I got this message delivered to me in the terminal. It said, "Hey, the War College list has just come out, and you've been selected. You could either go on to Germany, or you can come back here to this Office of the Chief of Staff and to stay here for until the class starts, or go on out to Carlisle Barracks and Snowbird." Well, Snowbird just wind up doing all sorts of picayunish things. So I said, "I'm going to Germany, and I hope I'll be allowed to go to the War College in the next class." So we went on to Germany, and I was then commanding a battalion in Berlin, and for a year and a half, and then I was assigned back to the War College. I went to the War College, and then I went to Vietnam.
What exactly is the War College, and what does that entail?
Well, War College is a senior training course
Okay.
for Army officers for the Army. Now, there's a National War College, which if you go to the Army War College, you won't go to the National War College. If you go to the National War College, you won't go to the Army, and so forth. And the Navy has a War College, the Air Force has it. But it's a senior, it's so-called master's degree, doctorate, or whatever you want to say. The Army would like to say that your college degree was your bachelor's, then the staff college was your master's, and the War College your PhD. You don't get one, but that's what we like to do. And you study high-level operations, joint operations, allied operations, diplomatic matters, and so forth.
And so from there you were deployed to Vietnam.
I went to Vietnam as a battalion commander.
Okay.
Again.
And so what were your assignments there?
Well, it was combat. I was assigned initially to the 1st Infantry Division, and then I had a light infantry battalion. The 9th Infantry Division had a mechanized battalion, and they were down in the Delta, which is the big swamp. And they decided that it was not effective. They wanted a trade battalion, so I took my battalion to the 9th Division, and they brought that mechanized division up. And so I finished my command as a battalion commander down there. And then I was picked to be the senior operations officer for the 1st Infantry Division, and I went back there and finished my tour there in Vietnam.
Do you feel you were prepared for that?
Yes, I was.
Mm-hmm.
As far as preparation goes, I'm absolutely sure I had already commanded for a year and a half an infantry battalion in Berlin. So the specter of how to do that was very clear. And so I didn't have any problem. It was combat, but
And how long were you there for?
a year.
A year. I imagine it was very stressful. What did you do to manage stress while you were there?
Well, I wouldn't want to say it's, hey, no problem, you handle it, by then, I was 40 years old. I was still healthy. My family was safe back here in Arlington. So, now there's a lot of things I would say we didn't do correctly strategically in Vietnam, but that was a national policy, it wasn't mine. So we had to fight it the way they said to.
Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, some of the things like one of the things you had to provide when you're trying to teach the Vietnamese how to fight their own battle, but you're in there amongst all of their people. The thing you must understand that people want to be made secure, and if you don't do that, then if we had a situation where you're fighting where villages are around, if you were fighting in this village and then when you leave that village, here came the Kong again, and they didn't take kindly to people who had been helpful to us, and it took them a long time to remember that, and then sometimes they just thought, well, hey, wait a minute, looking after these people is we'll try to set it up so the Vietnamese military can do that for us. Well, they were a corrupt organization in many cases themselves, and they didn't fight very well. Though they had divisions, 1 or 2 divisions that did, but generally speaking, they were not dependable soldiers for a lot of reasons. Their commanders, did I mention Colonel Keltner is my mentor here?
Yes.
Well, an officer, one of his principles was that an officer doesn't have the soldier do anything he can't do or won't do or hasn't done. And to give you an example, I was once conducting an operation down in the Delta where we were doing a joint operation with the Vietnamese regiment and my battalion. And so I was down there, and the Delta is largely a series, miles of rice paddies, and rice paddies with dikes all over. So these rice paddies water from ankle deep to knee deep to waist deep. If you step in a hole, it'd be deeper than that. But anyway, we were operating in this village where the Viet Cong had tunnels going out of the canal under the village and then come up. So we had tunnel rats that were going down there. I'm talking about soldiers, and this to do that. And this regimental commander was coming down to visit me there, and I'd been waiting around out there with what had to be done. And when the helicopter came down with the battalion commander, it hovered down there over the water, right near where the blades didn't want to get close to the village and hit a house or something. So soldiers ran out, lifted him up on their shoulders, walked him over to the landing and put him down. He had polished boots on and all. He walked around and talked a little bit. Then we talked, and not very intelligibly, but anyway, we talked. And he got ready to leave. He wasn't going to stay. I was. He got up on the soldier's shoulder. They walked him out to the helicopter. That kind of difference. Sometimes you saw Vietnamese officers with long fingernails. I mean long fingernails, like these last fingers be out there. That means they don't work with their hands. I'm talking about an officer who's supposed to be out there doing things. Now, they weren't all like that, but there were enough of them that, in my view, it corrupted their command relationship.
So what happened after Vietnam? Did you return back to the States after that?
Yes.
And what other assignments did you hold?
Well, when I came back from Vietnam, where did I go?
Are you done?
I went to teach at the Command and General Staff College.
Okay.
But from there, I went there as an instructor. And a brigade became available. I'd already commanded a brigade parts of the time in Vietnam. And so the 197th Infantry Brigade at Fort Benning, Georgia, became available, and a friend of mine who was in the Colonel's Assignment Division, I had been selected for full colonel, but not promoted. They call it a P colonel, promotable colonel. And he called me. He said, "Hey, they have a brigade down at Fort Benning. Nobody wants it." He said, "It's the worst brigade in the whole Army." He said, "It's also the largest brigade, but nobody wants it. It's got the highest AWOL rate." Now, this is 1969. And the Army, there have been books written about it, the Army in Agony and all that sort of thing. So the problem, I said, well, and I went to see my commander, who had been the commander of the division, one of the divisions in Vietnam. And he said, Latham, you go down there, you'll ruin yourself. But I really thought, if it's on the bottom, you can't go anywhere but up. So I accepted the command of the 197th Brigade and had 8,000 men, 8 battalions, 250 scout dogs at Fort Benning. So I went down, I took it, and I'm sure I became a general officer for that activity. I'd like to say it was my intelligence and good looks, but I think it was what happened. That brigade, we turned it around, and it was the largest brigade, and that's when President Nixon ended the draft and wanted to have an all-volunteer army, so we had to recruit our own army. This brigade, we started a recruiting program, and we recruited the first all-volunteer army in the modern army. So it was a good point for me, and when I finished my 2 years in command, I was then made Chief of Staff of the Infantry Center, and shortly thereafter I was promoted to Brigadier General. And from there I went to be Assistant Division Commander of the 3rd Mechanized Division in Germany. So we moved there. But my first office job as a general officer the list comes out, you know, and then everybody starts calling your name. Man, isn't that great? You know? So I was sitting in my desk the first morning after they came out. I got this phone call, and then my secretary came in. It's the chief of staff of the Army. It turned out it wasn't. It was a vice chief, but I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Latham, congratulations. I want you to write a book about your experience recruiting the 1st All-Volunteer Brigade." Click. He didn't relieve me of any duties, so I had to write a book. I brought a copy.
Oh. When did you join NATO Defense Command?
Well, every time I went to Germany, that was part of the NATO
That was part
Defense
of it,
Command.
okay.
But from Germany, from the when I first boarded brig, my first first assignment after I left Benning and wrote that book, which had happened pretty quick. I went to Germany and I stayed there for a year and a half, and then I was assigned to command the 197th Infantry Brigade as CG, Commanding General, U.S. Army, Alaska. So I went there, and from there I was selected for Major General, and I went back. I was assigned to Fort Benning as Commandant of the Infantry School. From there I went to Turkey to be Chief of the Military Assistance Advisory Group to Turkey. From there I went back to Germany to be the Deputy Commander of the 7th Corps. From there I came back to Arlington.
Do you still keep in touch with old friends from the military?
Yes.
Do you attend reunions or anything?
Yes.
When did you retire?
1980. Yeah, I've been out longer, almost as long as I was in.
Do you feel that your military experience, well, obviously it's a very different military experience now. Do you think that's viewed your opinions of the campaigns that are going on currently?
Say that again?
So your experiences in the military were very different than what, like it's almost a very different military than what is now, I would say, as far as combat goes.
Well, that's a yes and no question, or answer anyway. But, you know, some things are just the same. When you're talking about what happens down at the, I'm going to say platoon level, where the troops go out on patrol and so forth, some things that people forget and don't hear much about. No matter what kind of war it is, that is total war for those people. I mean, you can talk about security and education and public relations and all that sort of thing, and it has its place, of course. But for those young people who are doing that, man, that's no, you don't care about that. You either got to kill him or he's going to kill you, or her or it, as the case may be. And you got to be able to do that. Now, the Army that I feel like we had a lot to do with creating, from the volunteer Army, they are probably the most well-trained, best Army we have ever fielded. The infantry school has a annual conference. They call it warfighting conference, and they invite all the old commandants to come back to that, to listen to it and whatever. And they bring in commanders and leaders from all over the Army to tell them what they're doing and how they're doing it. So we say it's something like this: the young generals come in and tell us how they're doing it, and we're telling them how they should have done it. Then both of us go home thinking we did our duty. But one of the things, great difference now that you see, and I don't know, you see war movies and you see people. But one thing the troops are today, they're better equipped right now. Right now it's descending rapidly. We're about to have the same place we were in 1950, where the Army is going to be 450,000. That's how we went to Korea. And they're about to come down to 480,000 now. And all the problems that are going, there's more potential hostilities going on right now than there was then. It may have been going on then, but we didn't know it. And North Korea is about making noises at South Korea. Syria is going to hell in a handbasket. Iran is about to come up with nuclear weapons. We didn't talk about it. We went through a preparation for nuclear war. We had nuclear weapons assigned to us in Germany, and all that sort of thing. I mean, down at the tactical level, it's called the Davy Crockett. where you'd fire I'm gonna pull a number out of my ears, let's say, half a kiloton of explosive, think about that one. And all that sort of thing. Well, none of that happened, but it could have.
Do you have any advice for current UTA cadets?
Pay attention. Make good grades. Stay in good physical shape.
Is there anything you would like to contribute to the interview that I did not ask?
Well, no, I don't think so.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, General Latham, for spending your time with us today. It was a pleasure talking with you, and you were very informative and very helpful. And I want to thank you for your service. And
Thank you. You're welcome.
I want to thank you again for contributing to Maverick Veterans Voices Project. Thank you.
Thank you.